but I want you to be joyful always. You are at work more than you're at home. And it's my job to make your work a joyful experience.
Hello everyone, and welcome aboard to our Farol de Pouso weekly podcast. My name is Guilherme, or you can call me just Gui, and I'm speaking to you directly from Montreal for another international episode. And stay tuned, because our guest, I have to say, it's no ordinary guest, and you'll find out why very soon. Also, a big thank you to our sponsors, Hangar 33 and Realizar Escola de Aviação. With me today, Conrado, Daniel, Felix, and Caio. And our special guest is Chris Grazel. He's the COO, or the Chief Operating Officer of Fly Dubai. Chris, first of all, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. We're honored of having you here today. And to get things started, Conrado, tell us a bit about Chris.
Hi guys, hello Chris. So sorry, before I'd like to do like a proper introduction because it's a heavy guest today. First of all, I'm happy to be back recording in English. I haven't been present to these English talks for a while, so it's a real pleasure for me to be here with you. Just to put in the context, I know that because of our guest today, we may have some new listeners to our podcast. So we are a podcast hosted by Brazilian pilots, and we normally record in Portuguese, our language, and we try eventually to bring international guests and record in English as well. So that's why you're gonna listen to some weird accents, and my apologies for our mistakes, but we do that mainly, as I was talking to Chris on the warm-up, to help our Brazilian pilots, especially to practice their English, because unfortunately, coming from Brazil, it's not a country where we learn proper English at school. So we have to learn by ourselves. So go to private schools and stuff. So this is the objective of our podcast in English. So for you who is here for the first time, welcome. It's a pleasure to host you, and it's a pleasure to host as well Chris Grazel. So Chris is someone, well, everybody, the crew here, our team, they know that I dream about this episode for a long time. We have a list of possible guests, and Chris was on the top one list for the international guests. And luckily, just the alignment of the stars and the timing was perfect. So we have Chris today. And I'm very happy to have him because it's someone who has a superb curriculum, but especially who is an extraordinary human being, as you're going to realize very, very soon. Chris is someone who I really, really admire, and it's an inspiration for me as a leader. And thank you very much, Chris. I think I've talked too much. Everybody wants to listen to you. Thanks to accept the invitation to be with us, and I'd like to give the word to you to say your first words and maybe how you started your passion for aviation.
Thanks, Conrado. Thank you, Guy. First, I want to say, hey, it's very unusual for me to do this type of interview and things like this. Usually, I just turn them down. I don't. I always try and stay out of the spotlight. I always try and let others take that. Conrado got me at a time of weakness. I'm retiring. And so I said, I'm retiring. Since I'm retiring at the end of the month, let me go ahead and do something like this. Again, not something that I do, and you'll find as I talk, it's not my core competency to certainly talk about myself or do this type of thing. But happy to. I love talking to pilots, though. Pilots love talking to pilots, love being around pilots. And I think the first question you asked was kind of, how did I get started in aviation? And I can tell you, ever since I was a little boy, I wanted to be a pilot. And the reason I wanted to be a pilot, because my dad was a pilot. My dad was a pilot in World War II, and he got to fly a few different airplanes. He flew AT-6s, he flew P-40s, and that was an inspiration to me. But also my uncle was also a military pilot, and he was a naval aviator, and he actually ended up as the senior most naval aviator in the United States Navy. They call them the Gray Eagle, and I got to hear stories from my dad about World War II, and I got to hear stories from my uncle about the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and that was just something as a child that was hugely appealing to me. And it was something that I said, hey, that's something like I'd want to do. So I started doing some research, and from the U.S. perspective, they say if you want to go in the military, one of the best things to do is to go to one of the military academies. And so I applied to the Naval Academy for two reasons. One, because my uncle was a naval aviator, and he kind of convinced me, well, if you really want to be a pilot, you have to land on a ship. Well, I didn't know much about aviation. That was one of the reasons. The other reason was my girlfriend at the time was going to a school very close to where the Naval Academy was. And I said, that's probably a very smart thing to do, to go to school there. So went there, 4 years there, finished up, got my degree, became an ensign in the Navy, asked for flying, got a pilot position. And when you get a pilot position, they can't send the entire class of pilots all at one time. So you can pick and choose where you may want to go for the next 6 months or so. So actually I said, hey, I've just spent 4 years working hard. I just finished in the summer. I don't want to go to flight school right away. Let's see where I could go, which would be a fun place to go. So I saw that there is a squadron in Virginia Beach that I could go and just do administrative work. And so I said, hey, I'm going to sign up for that place in Virginia Beach. So I got orders there for 6 months. Really unbeknownst to me, it was an air-to-air combat aggressor squadron. And at the time they were flying T-38s, TA-4s, A-4s. And there was 3 of us there as brand new ensigns, 2 from the Naval Academy, one guy who I didn't know from the Naval Academy, who became my best friend, and I was the best man in his wedding, and he in mine. And his parents lived there. And there was 2 places that you could live. You could live on the Naval Air Base, or I found out from some intel that there was another base that was right on the beach. So I ended up having a beachfront room for 6 months. But the best part was these guys just took us under their wing. They loved us, and we would go what we call with trunk rides. And so for somebody, I had no previous, I had 10 hours in prop planes training at the Naval Academy. But for somebody who had never been in a real tactical jet before, this was amazing, because just putting the gear on is something you have to get used to. Putting on the oxygen mask, and then going out and doing air-to-air combat as somebody. I was just so fearful I was going to throw up before my first flight or on the flight. Beforehand, I'm drinking Maalox and things like that because I didn't want to embarrass myself. Fortunately, I didn't. And then once you don't get sick, you realize you're not going to get sick. But it gave me such an edge up on the competition when I went to flight school. Because I had about 30 of these flights. And when we weren't doing the mission, they would go, hey, you want to fly? Hey, sure, I'd love to fly. Now, you want to do some acrobatics? Sure. You want to do some formation flying, which wasn't very good, but but it was just the ability to do that. So I went to flight school, and obviously I was well ahead of my peers from a bunch of things, very comfortable. So ended up doing very well. And when I finished flight school, I was able to pick and say, they said, what type of airplane do you want? And I said, hey, at the time the F-14 was brand new. And I said, hey, I'd love to fly the F-14. So I was sent to San Diego, to Miramar, to fly the F-14. Well, they were a little behind there too. So we got about 3 or 4 months on the beach before we started flying, which was a great place to be in San Diego and just enjoy the beach. They did give us our books. And I do remember we had a confidential book and then a non-confidential book. And my roommate at the time, and I didn't know this, but we went to a place called, I'm trying to think of where it was, but we went Hobie catting because he had a Hobie cat. So we're out there Hobie catting, and we get back to after Hobie catting, and somebody had broken into his car. And you go, oh, that's a terrible thing. And he goes, yeah, that's a terrible thing. It's really bad because I had the confidential manual. He had his confidential manual in there that was stolen. So this is when the F-14 is brand new. And that was a big deal that he had to then confess that his manual was stolen. So that's just a side story. So go through F-14 training, which was great. And then pretty much after we graduate, we all get sent to different squadrons. I got sent to squadron, which was called VF-51. There was a few of us who went to the same squadron. This roommate also, we got in the same squadron. And then you start preparing to go to sea. And you start doing what's called workups and sea time and get ready for your first cruise. And off we go on our first cruise, which is supposed to be about 6 months long. And then there was the Iranian hostage crisis. And instead of 6 months long, it ended up 9 months long. So then, which is not a great thing because you're planning on 6 months and then a 9-month cruise away from family, friends, girlfriends, things like that. That's a little challenging. Not that we didn't have a lot of good times while we were in port and things like that, but because of the tempo of operations, we would be out to sea for about 100 days at a time.
Sorry to interrupt you,
yeah.
But I believe at this time you actually learn how to land in a ship, right?
Oh yes, that's the well. Before you get your wings in the Navy, what you have to do is you do your basic jet training, which was done in the T2 Buckeye, and then you do your advanced jet training, which is done in an A4. And I remember, and you do hundreds of practices at the field called FCLPs, Field Carrier Landing Practice, and you get debriefed on every single pass by the landing signal officer. And you do that for a couple of weeks. You do it in the simulator, you do it, and then off you go to the ship. Now, the first time you go to the ship, you're out there solo. There's nobody with you. Absolutely nobody with you. And so the first thing you do is you do a couple touch and goes, and you come into the break, and then you break, you come around, you do the pattern. And I remember as I'm going through about the 180, I look down, and behind the ship, there's all this extra water being splashed around. And I look down there, and I'm really supposed to be paying attention to what I'm doing, but I have so little experience. I'm still doing. And what had happened was they were throwing the trash from the ship overboard, and the sharks were having a feeding frenzy right behind the ship. Well, that wasn't a great motivator as I'm trying to land for the first time. So I actually was a little high. It wasn't the best pass, but you go around, you end up with 4 arrested landings, then off you go to the beach. I did fine. And that was basic training. Then you go to advanced training and in the TA4, and you're supposed to get 6 landings. So there's a couple, and again, you're all solo, you have no instructors with you. And we go and do a couple of touch and goes. The guy in front of me, they finally say hook down, and you put your hook down after you do the touch and goes. The guy in front of me, as he's landing, the landing signal officer starts yelling, power, 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 real loud. And then he ends up going around, but he was so far close to the flight deck that he touched down, he grabbed the hook, but then he got airborne with the wire engaged and slammed down and smashed the nose wheel off his airplane. So that was before my first A4 landing. So now the ship is out of commission. They had to send us all back to the beach, and then you have to come back. And some people, I guess I'm very fortunate. I go, boy, my whole day is ruined. I wanted to go land, and this guy spoiled it for everybody. Not going, oh wow, this must be something dangerous. What we used to call that in the Navy was IDGAS, IDGAS. I'm trying to think what that means. It's NAFOD, NAFOD, no apparent fear of death. So for fighter pilots, they want you to have NAFOD, so that you have no apparent fear of death flying. I think as part of immaturity, those are things that you go, it's no big deal. As you mature and then you get a wife and kids, your amount of NAFOD is significantly reduced. But I'm thinking at this time, I'm 21, 22 years old and going to the ship for the first time. So that was landing there. Then you go to the F-14 squadron, and then you do a bunch of flights and you do all kinds of missions. You start on different types of scenarios. And then the last thing you do is carrier qualifications. And on the F-14, it's the first time you do the carrier qualifications at night. And from a pilot perspective, daytime gets to be lots of fun. I don't know any pilot I've ever met that's not sweaty at the end of a night carrier landing. It's just something that, hey, it's okay, but it is sweating. You sweat the whole time, and you wouldn't volunteer for a lot of extra night flights. You would volunteer for all the day flights you could do.
Which year was that, Chris? Were you from F-14?
I graduated in 76, got my wings in 2 years later in 78, and then went to the F-14 squadron and finished up there around 1980, 81.
They were brand new, right? They were brand new.
Oh, brand new. When I went to the squadron had just transitioned from F-4s, and we had 12 brand new F-14 Tomcats. So at that point in time, I think I'm about 23 years old, and I have a brand new F-14 Tomcat that has my name and call sign on it. So
just like Tom Cruise.
So just like Tom Cruise, yeah.
And just like Tom Cruise,
that's amazing.
You were a Top Gun division instructor, right? Just like him.
So I'll explain that. Top Gun actually, when we were in the squadron, normally you send one crew a year to go to Top Gun. And so I didn't have the opportunity to do that because of tempo of operations. And one of the things that I did was a couple of things. The Navy tells you never to volunteer for anything. I mean, the military says never volunteer. I volunteered, I think, for two things. One thing I volunteered for was to become a landing signal officer, so I could be the one who was teaching and grading, because I found out that all the guys that were the LSOs, they were the coolest guys in the squadron. They were the guys that you really looked up to. They were like the number one TREs. They did everything, and they threw the best parties at the same time. So I wanted to be one of those guys. So I volunteered for that. The other thing I volunteered for, when you're on the ship, when you go out to sea for 100 days, after you've been out for close to 100 days, they'll let you throw a party on board the flight deck where they're cooking steaks. And normally the ship is dry, but when they do this, they serve beer. But everybody's only allowed to get 2 beers. Now I volunteered to be the person to hand out the beers. So I don't know why I thought that was a great idea, but because I was the guy handing the beers out, and you're only supposed to give 2, unfortunately, too many times I dropped a whole case or so of beer on the flight deck, and they were damaged. And because they were damaged, I would give those damaged beers as extra beers to my friends. So that's how we avoided the 2 beer limit. So
that's a good idea.
Then I did a second cruise, which was 9 months long, and then you're up for orders because you have 3 years. Now, fortunately, my first year in the squadron, my first tour in the squadron, we won the award for the best fighter squadron in the Pacific Fleet, and then in my second cruise, some people say this is a reward and some people say it's punishment, but the commanding officer was a backseater, and he gets to choose who he wants to be his pilot. So he gets to choose of all the pilots who he wants. So he chose me to be his pilot for the second cruise. And this was considered although this is my second cruise, this is my first tour, and it was almost unheard of that a first tour guy would be the skipper's pilot. It's usually one of the very, very senior guys that would be the skipper's pilot. But that was an honor to be selected for that. So then I'm up for orders, and I want to then go back and be, I was asked if I wanted to join the Blue Angels, which is a great honor. But I said, no, I really enjoy flying fighters, and I want to go to the East Coast Squadron, which is an air-to-air combat squadron, which was called VF-43, because my family was from the East Coast. Top Gun's on the West Coast. And the detailer says, well, we'll send you to the East Coast, but because you're an LSO, we're going to send you to the F-14 training squadron, and you have to be an instructor, and we want you to be in charge of carrier qualifications. So I went there, and actually my last full-time active duty job was in charge of all the Atlantic Fleet F-14 day and night carrier qualifications. And I had a team of LSOs that worked for me, but I was the one who had to sign everybody off to make sure that they could go to their fleet squadron. And sadly, most people made it, but if you didn't make it, it was almost the end of somebody's career as a shipboard aviator. They would let you go fly non-carrier-based airplanes, but they wouldn't let you fly carrier-based airplanes. Again, a very difficult thing to do, but it's just one of those things. If you're put in charge, sadly, sometimes you have to make that decision. So then I'm up for orders again, and they said, hey, we want you to be the LSO for the entire air wing. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, if I do this, I'm going to be on shipboard duties for the next 8 out of the next 10 years. And I had recently been married. We had a young child. And I said, I don't think I want to go out to sea for my next 8 to 10 years and be away from my family. At the same time, as I was an instructor, you instruct on a few different things. And I was instructing on air-to-air combat. I was instructing on air-to-air gunnery. And one of the squadrons that provided the air combat support was a reserve squadron. So it was a bunch of guys that were active duty. They're in the reserves. They were all F-4 pilots, mostly from the Vietnam War, but they were all airline pilots. And they said, you really should just come over and fly with us. And, you can be an airline pilot, and then you can fly with us for as much as you want. So I said, hey, that sounds good. It was a very difficult process, but I said, hey, I turned in my active duty resignation, but was able to go the next day right into the reserve squadron. And I didn't even have an airline job. So they said, hey, we hope you don't get an airline job, because then you can just fly for us, the whole month doing air-to-air combat. But I did apply to a bunch of airlines. I applied to People Express, Eastern Airlines, United Airlines, US Airways. And people said, hey, I'd ask, who pays the most? Oh, US Airways pays the most. Okay, I want to fly for US Airways. So for about the next 5 years, I would fly for the airline about 12 days a month. I would then fly air combat 12 days a month. And then I had a few days off and did that for about 5 years. So I think that was the best time. And as part of that time, as soon as I went to the squadron, they said, hey, we need to send you to Top Gun, because Top Gun has 2 courses. They have the active duty course, which I missed the timing for that. And then they have a course just for instructors. So if you're going to be an instructor teaching air-to-air combat, then you go to the instructor course. So most people think it's just one course, but there's actually 2 courses that go on simultaneously.
Well, that sounds like a dream job. You're doing a double shift, fly, half time with, was it on the 737?
So I started off with US Airways on the BAC 111, BAC 111. Well, I actually started as an engineer. They throw you in as a 727 engineer. I said, this is one of the hardest jobs I've ever had. They really want you to be system oriented, and I can't tell you how many mistakes I made as an engineer, but
as a flight engineer,
balance the fuel manually and do all these things.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What's that?
A flight engineer, you mean?
Yeah,
right?
727. Did that for a year, went to the Bach 111 for a year, and then went to the 737 and stayed on the 737, the 200, the 300s, the 400s at the airline. Initially as a first officer, and usually you want to upgrade to captain as soon as possible. But because I was flying for the reserve, my schedule was very, very important to me. So I was actually the last guy in my class to upgrade. And then I was only a line captain for a very short period of time. And then I was asked to go into the training department. So then I went into the training department for initially.
You were a first officer with
Yes.
US Airways who was instructing for the Top Gun division, right?
Correct.
Very interesting.
Well, and amazingly, the first Top Gun movie came out just about the time that I was going through Top Gun, but I never went and saw the movie because I said, this is going to be one of these hokey movies. I'll pick it apart, and I didn't see the movie for about 10 years after it came out. But when I go and look at it now, which I have, and I look at the credits and they show who's flying, I go, I know I flew with him or I flew with him. And then some of the scenes are actual real Navy people at the bar, and I go, I know him,
And this was one of my questions. Have you seen the newest one?
I did see the newest one fairly soon after it came out.
As a Top Gun pilot, what do you think about the movie?
I thought it was actually better than the first movie. I thought the flying scenes were exceptional. They're a little bit more realism to them. The low altitude stuff, we do all the crazy low altitude stuff. Some people said, I'm sure you don't do that low altitude stuff. Oh, we do that low altitude stuff all the time. I have this big picture in my office at home of this F-14 flying over the water, kicking up a rooster tail. And people go, oh, you never did that. I said, well, unfortunately, yes. My first flight on a cross country when I wasn't the instructor was from Kingsville, Texas to Las Vegas. And as first thing we did was we canceled IFR and we went through the Grand Canyon. Not above the Grand Canyon, we went through the Grand Canyon, and then we popped up and there's this lake there called Lake Mead, and my instructor says, hey, watch this. We're gonna try and knock the water skiers off their water skiing as they're skiing. So, I'm just a student. I'm going, I guess this is what you're supposed to do. But these were all Vietnam War type pilots, and that's what they did to survive. They wanted to stay as low as possible. And getting back to that F-14 picture, I was leading a flight one day, an air to ground flight, but we were doing a low level mission, then pop up and then do air to ground. And I had a British exchange pilot as my wingman, and he was technically the student. And we were flying over this river. Yes, that's my picture. Yes, right there. And it's him. I can show it. I'll show it to you later. But we were having a contest.
People are not seeing that, but I showed the picture of the
Vamos fazer uma tradução rápida em português para quem não entendeu. Quando ele falou ali, né, kicking up a rooster tail, é aquele rasante que ele dá tão baixo que sai aquele jato de água assim e levanta um rabo de galo do mar. E essa foi a foto que o Conrado mostrou. Então, cara, isso aqui é simplesmente sensacional. We are speechless.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So we were having this contest, and we were having a contest who would fly the lowest to the ground. So one of us would go low, the other would go low, and finally you get to the point you can only tie the record, and you don't want to tie the record. Tying the record is not a good thing. So, but we were extremely low, and again, one of the fun things that we got to do. But then you asked about the movie. I thought the movie was great. There's a few things that weren't realistic, but I thought the flying scenes were very cool. I was just talking to our NCDM duty manager today, and he was asking about the movie, what was real, what wasn't real. One of the things it wasn't real, but it was kind of real. If you remember, there was the two F-18 pilots, and they go, hey, who is this guy? He wants to go and fight us 2v1, or we call that 1v2. And that actually was my favorite type of flight when I'm the instructor and I'm going to fly against two guys. And we used to love to do that because, you're not supposed to win, but when you go out 1v2 and you kill both the other guys, that's a pretty good experience. And usually when we were in the reserve squadron, we were flying the A4s, which is a very old airplane, to the F-14, or we would fly against F-15s or F-16s, and they would go, oh my goodness, we're going to go out there, we're going to kick your butt, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. There's two of us flying these world-class fighters against you in this old airplane. And then when you come back and you do the debrief and they've both been shot, or one of the two was shot, again, it's a very humbling experience. But from an instructor perspective, that's one of the things you want to do, because we always have to fight against overconfidence. And that's a way to get somebody to realize, hey, really, most of the times after doing hundreds of air-to-air combat missions, the times that I got shot, it was getting shot by the person that I did not see. And you come to realize you can be the best fighter pilot in the world, but if you're in a multi-plane environment and there's lots of other planes out there, the person you don't see is the person and a lot of times you're getting ready to shoot somebody, and the next thing they come up over like they did in Top Gun and say, hey, Gazer, you're dead. I'm dead. Oh my goodness, what a terrible thing. I was just going to kill this guy. So again, I thought the movie was pretty good. There's a few things. I was sitting next to my daughter, and I had and a couple of things happened, and she goes, this was when Tom Cruise got shot down, and she goes, Tom Cruise got shot down. What's going to happen? I said, well, I think they're close to Iran. He's probably going to go. He's going to jump into an F-14, and he's going to fly, because the Iranians are still flying the F-14s. And then he'll fly away. And then, if you remember, then he took off, and as he took off, he sheared his nose wheel. And she goes, oh my goodness, what's going to happen now? Oh, don't worry. They're just going to go to the carrier. They'll put the barrier up, and he's going to land, and he'll land into the barrier. It's no big deal.
Oh yeah, well, obviously that was a bit predictable, right? That
yes.
He will make it somehow, right?
Absolutely, yes.
But well, I think we could stop recording right now, because this story is so amazing that we could actually split this podcast into two. But
we should have a series here.
Yeah, we could move on now to your civilian career, Chris.
Sure. In the military, you get to a point where the Navy's a little bit different from the Air Force. The Air Force kind of keeps you flying as long as possible. The Navy promotes you, and they put you in a non-flying job when they promote you after a certain point, which is very disappointing. So I got promoted, went to a non-flying job, and it was funny because they were starting this new organization. I don't know how I got selected at the time. I found out later on how I got selected, but all these people from surface line, from the supply corps, from the submarines, they're there talking about the first few days of building up this organization, and what they say, please tell us, why you're here. And all these guys from these other different branches of the Navy go, oh, this is the highlight of my career. I've been wanting to do this. And finally they get to me and they said, oh, well, why are you here? And I said, well, I've been flying single seat fighters for the last, 5 years. I flew F-14s. This is my payback, I guess. And they were all like shocked. You're not so excited to be here. This is for a pilot. You're taking me out of the cockpit. But I realized very shortly why I got selected. The admiral of the unit was my commanding officer in the reserve squadron. And before he was my commanding officer, I was an instructor pilot, and we did a 6-plane air-to-air gunnery hop, and I was the lead instructor. We did 2 3-plane ships, and he was the guy who was pulling the banner that we were shooting. He was the commanding officer of that squadron. And unfortunately, during one of the runs, my 2 wingmen had a mid-air collision, and it was like the biggest fireball you've ever seen. And prior to the collision, you hear one of the guys on the radio come up and say, "Oh shit!" And then something bad's going to happen. And what happened was these 2 guys were out of alignment for the pattern that we were doing. And it's kind of like when you're walking down the hall and you go one way and the guy in front of you goes that way, and then you go the next way and the guy goes the next way, and the third time they ran into each other. But he was the senior guy that was there, and he said, "Oh, I wanted you in the squadron because the way you handled the search and rescue, the way you handled everything," he said, "I just wanted you to be part of the squadron. And then when I saw that you were available, I wanted you to run the operations department for this new directorate." It was actually a logistics operation that was designed to look at all the shortcomings from the first Gulf War and put fixes in place for all the logistics shortcomings from the first Gulf War from a Navy perspective.
Interesting. Well, so moving on, you are with U.S. Airways as a captain and a trainer on the 737, right?
Yes.
And then I very soon, I believe, you got your experience with the military, and you could use that experience to do some management work with the U.S. right?
So now I wasn't flying full time, so I go, I'm not flying full time. I don't need the 12 days doing air-to-air combat. So about that, I was an instructor on the 737, the 200. We had this special thing called Metrojet, but then there was an economic downturn, and they decided, okay, we're going to park all the Metrojet airplanes. So I went from being an instructor, having a pretty good schedule with the instructors and a pretty good life. And now I'm going to have to go back to the line, and I'm going to be on reserve. So there was a assistant chief pilot's position open. And so I said, well, let me apply for that assistant chief pilot position, realizing that just about every one of my peers applied for the same thing with the same thought process. So I found out later, 33 of us applied for that position. And fortunately, I got the position as the assistant chief pilot in the Washington, D.C. base. So that got me into management. So I'm in there in management. And then I think most pilots will understand this. You have all these little things that happen. We went through 2 bankruptcies. We lost our pension the first time, and then we got a new pension. We lost that the second time, but I'm still having pretty well situated. But when I was at U.S. Airways, because I was military, I was representing U.S. Airways as each airline had 1 or 2 reps that would meet in the Pentagon and would talk about military airline liaison. And most of the heavy lift for the United States Air Force of Reserves is actually done by airline pilots. So they want to have a great cooperation. So you have the military people and the airline people to ensure that. So I was the rep for that. So I met people from all the other airlines, and I met the guy from Southwest Airlines, and the guy from Southwest Airlines' name was Ken Guile, who was our previous COO. And he called me up one day and said, "Hey, I'm starting a new airline. Would you like to come as the first chief pilot?" So after 2 bankruptcies, I decided the crazy thing that I would go to a startup for a 50% pay cut, but the option for lots of shares if it worked out. And I was the 6th employee to go to start this new airline. And after I was there for a few months, I was doing a little research, and I found out that 95% of the people in the United States that apply and try and start an airline fail. So we were all Boeing people. We all went. I was Boeing. He was Boeing from Southwest. The VP of Flight Ops was Boeing from Delta, and we all had a Boeing background. Boeing wanted us to buy Boeing. They were whining and dining us. Airbus wanted us to buy Airbus. They were whining and dining us, but we were leaning towards Boeing. But on one of our visits to Toulouse, they offered us such a great deal, 65 A319s or 320s, and we signed with them. So it was pretty amazing because the Airbus team felt we would be the next Ryanair EasyJet in the United States. And so they heavily backed us. We had as a funding, we had got together about 168 million, but Airbus was willing to let us buy $3 billion worth of airplanes. So that was a great thing, except when we did that, our business plan, oil was at $20 a barrel. We would tell everybody during our fundraising, hey, even at $100 a barrel, we're still going to be able to make it because our costs are so low. When oil got to $147 a barrel, the investors wanted their money back. So we shut the airline down.
Was that Skybus?
So that was Skybus, yes.
Skybus. It didn't last much then.
Pardon?
It didn't last much then.
So we lasted just under a year.
Okay.
So, but before we were actually the fastest airline in history in the U.S. to profitability before the oil change. And 6 months after the chairman declared bankruptcy, he said, this is the worst decision I ever made. I should have realized what was going to happen. But sadly, all of us, you lost our jobs. So from there, I needed a job. I started applying for jobs, and I became the VP of flight ops at Spirit Airlines in Florida, which is another low-cost 320 operator. But it's the only time I did not have a success story in my career. I think Conrad, you probably know this, I'm very conservative, I'm very people-oriented, very team-oriented. I was an outcast at Spirit, and I can just tell one quick story. We're in the boardroom with all the other VPs, and you have to put this in perspective of political correctness. And the head of in-flight says, "Hey, I just ordered these 2,000 new aprons for our flight crew," and he shows this to him, and it says, "What do you think of my double D's?" And I said, "Hey, you can't do that." And the double D is the daily deal for Spirit. And some of their other advertising was, "Go south for VD, go south for Valentine's Day." So I was the outcast. I was the one saying, this is inappropriate. You can't do this. And then finally the CEO goes, "Hey, you're really the hardest working guy we've got, but you don't fit in here." So from there, I went to the National Aviation Hall of Fame as the executive director. And I found out that was a retirement job, and that was a boring job. Then I was asked to start another airline in Carlsbad, which was a great place to go. But I got there and realized they didn't have enough money to get started. And then I got a phone call from a headhunter saying, "Would you be willing to come to India and work for Go Air as the VP of flight ops?" Well, from a spiritual perspective, for years, my wife and I have always been very involved with our church. And we said, we would love to go someplace overseas to help our church, but we don't want to be one of those people living in a tent or a bag, but we're happy to go and help the church. So, and my wife said, my only requirement is I want it to be a warm climate. So I'm talking, and I told her about the job. And finally, I decided, I better take this job. So I call my wife up and I say, "Hey, that job in India that I was talking about, I took that job. And this is one of the things that I should impress upon you. Don't take a job without getting advice from your wife first." and she goes, "What do you mean you took that job?" I said, "Well, you told me we've been praying about this. You said you wanted to go someplace that was a warm climate." She goes, "I said a warm climate. I'm thinking Bermuda, the Caribbean, Hawaii. I never, ever said India. Never did I say India." I said, "Well, too late now." So we went to India for 2 years. And while I was there, Ken Guile calls and says, "Hey, I'm sick. I have cancer. I need somebody to come take over as the COO of Fly Dubai. Would you be willing to come?" So that's how that process started. And that's how I got to Fly Dubai.
Okay, before getting to Fly Dubai, I'd like to ask you, how was being overseas? How was the experience of leaving the US and leaving everything behind? Because I think all of us here, we've been through this process. And how was it for you?
Well, you heard my military stories, and I'll briefly do a little segue. My daughter now is here with us at Fly Dubai because she's going into her senior year. And she's going into her senior year, and she's into psychology. So I arranged for her to do a psychology internship. Well, because we're hiring so many pilots, she's involved with the test taking and the administration. And I said, hey, how's the job going? And she goes, Dad, we're seeing lots of pilots. And she goes, they're very excited to be here. They're very optimistic. They're not like the other groups of people that are fighting for a job and almost backstabbing. They're all helping each other out. I said, that's great. And she goes, yeah, but pilots are really arrogant. So that was her first impression. So my point being, coming from my background, I'm going overseas, and I probably still maintaining this arrogant mindset. And so I get to India and I'm going, I wonder what kind of problems we're going to have. What are going to be the issues with the pilots? What are going to be these things? And I found out that they were some of the finest pilots I've ever worked with in my life. Just outstanding people, outstanding pilot, as good as any pilots on the face of the earth. So that was my mindset to say, hey, stupid American, you don't think that just because you're told this your whole life, is it true?
That's an incredible cultural range of perspective that we have when we go overseas, right? Especially coming from the West, because the East is kind of something that we don't know much about, right? In terms of culture. So it's something that it's a game changer for us in terms of growth. So we grow as human beings when we come to this area, right?
Oh, absolutely. Now Mumbai was a very, very challenging place to live. It was very difficult to live, and we had 2,000 employees. The CEO and I are the only expats that are there. And then the government, the DGCA, the airline had to sign a form that was thrown in my face a few times that says the reason we're hiring this expat is because we can't find a qualified Indian in this position. Well, you can imagine how well that went over. And my first few interviews with the DGCA were very strained and very, very difficult. But over time, and this is typical. I also ran the NCC there. After I had been there for about a year, I got there and I had more than one person come up to me and said, we didn't give you a month here. We never thought you were going to make it. And I said, well, why didn't you think you were going to make it? Well, you don't yell at anybody. You don't scream at anybody. You don't put anybody down in front of other people. These are all the things that happens on a regular basis. So we just figured everybody was going to walk all over you and you would have no success. But after a while, and this is part of the military leadership, where you praise in public and you reprimand in private. It didn't mean that we didn't have some difficult talks with some after some things happened, but they were always done in privacy. And you always praise your team in public. And they actually said, hey, that is really great. We want to try some of these things to see if they work. I guarantee that they will be successful. But there's certain places, and the culture you talked about, cultures aren't used to somebody not being, particularly in the Indian culture, we're not being used to somebody being harsh. Now, there were times when we had to make very tough decisions, whether you terminate somebody or you don't terminate somebody. And there's times you have to make very difficult decisions. But you can do that in a way that you still don't destroy somebody by having to make those difficult decisions. And so that was one of the cultural aspects. But that was one of the blessings that having had that experience, then coming to Fly Dubai, now I had some international experience that I had not had before. If I had just come straight to Fly Dubai, my learning curve would have been much, much longer. And one of the best things was going into the NCC first, and having been in India. When I was in India, the Indians hated the Pakistanis, and the Pakistanis hate the Indians. Well, in the NCC, at least a few years ago, it was about a 50% Indian staff, a 50% Pakistani staff. And they just got along amazingly well. they love each other, they work hard together, they support each other. And you can see when you get the government entity or that constant government telling you that somebody's bad, and people get to see people for real and can get to see how genuine and kind and nice they are, all those stereotypes fall away, except when the cricket match is playing and then the knives come out and they hate each other again. But as long as the cricket match isn't on, then they're fine. Felix, I think you have a question.
Yes, I do, Chris. Could you explain to our audience how does that NCC work? And so it was a network control center, right? And
Network Control Center, yes. So I always say that the Network Control Center is one of two things. It's either the brain. People don't necessarily like to hear it's the brain of the airline. So the other thing I say, it's the heart of the airline. So we have specifically, we built a brand new headquarters, and when we have changed the way, and we haven't changed it, we've modified the way we've built the NCC up, but it's all designed for situational awareness. You have your duty manager who's kind of like the maestro of the band, and he's sitting there, and then around him, he has dispatchers, he has operations control people, he has airport services team, he's got the load, weight, and balance team, he's got the cargo team, he's got the daily crew schedulers, he's got the engineers, the daily engineers, the planning engineers, and it's designed so that if something happens, then you can, but just by situational awareness, you don't have to inform everybody individually. You can hear that something's going on. So say there's a disruption at one of the airports. Okay, there's a disruption at one of the airports. So then the team starts looking at, okay, what's happening with connections? Or what's happening with the airplane? Or do I need parts for the airplane? Do I need maintenance for the airplane? Do I need an extra crew to come in? All those different things. It's designed that way. And one of the things I've tried to teach the team, I've told them a few sayings, and sometimes you say sayings that you wish you hadn't said. But one of my sayings that comes back to haunt me is I would tell them, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. And that's come back to haunt me a few times, but it's helped us many times. The other thing that we've trained the team is don't disrupt a disruption. And what that means is we practice things 24/7. We do things the same way 24/7. When there's a disruption, don't start thinking of these neat out-of-the-box ways to fix it. We have all of our plans in place. The intensity may increase dramatically so. We may have to bring in extra people, but we keep doing the same things the same way we've been doing every single day. And that way we don't disrupt the disruption. We are able to overcome it so much quicker by not changing the way we do business.
Have you ever had any a massive disruption or a very significant recovery flight that you had to organize?
We knock on wood, we haven't had a massive disruption since 2019. But as you know, Dubai, when the fog comes in, it can just shut the entire airport down. We're very fortunate. We don't have snow, we don't have tornadoes, and we don't have off and on thunderstorms all the time. But when the fog comes in, it can shut down the airport for a very, very long time. So that's one of the things that's always a challenge, and we always prepare for that. And along with building the new NCC, we have a brand new, what we call CMC, the Crisis Management Center. And it's state of the art, and we only use it for disruptions. You're not allowed to use it for a classroom. We'll bring guests in there. We occasionally will use it for a meeting with the GCAA to talk about how it's set up. But if you go through the table, there's probably about 30 different seats in there. At the top, you have the emergency response director, you have the note director, you have the chief operating officer, you have the CEO, the CCO, and then you have the head of ops, the head of safety, you have the head of in-flight, the head of training, and as you go down the table, then you get to the support functions, the head of legal, the head of customer care, the head of HR, the head of finance. So everybody's there, and we do drills a few times a year, and we make up whatever the drills are, and we hope to never use them. But one of the ways that, part of my military background, but the guy who went to Virginia Beach with me, who I was the best man in his wedding, he ended up being the commanding officer of the USS Enterprise, not the one in Star Trek, but the real Navy ship. And I was out visiting him one day, and he said, "Hey, we're getting ready for a visit from the Admiral." And I said, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing different?" He said, "We're not doing anything different. We keep this ship spick and span 24/7, 365. We don't have to do anything special. That's just the way we operate."
Awesome. And then, Chris, you move up to COO, right?
Yes.
Chief Operating Officer and the accountable manager. Before we step into this subject, I'd like you to introduce and talk about what is your responsibility on these two areas, and what do you do as a COO? What do you do as an accountable manager? Most of our audience probably they don't know exactly what you do.
Well, what I do as a COO is I pick a great team and let them run and work everything. And we have a few leadership meetings, but you empower them, you pick them, you choose them, and they do a great job, and they run the airline. So we're very, very fortunate they have a good team. Occasionally, I have to make a few decisions, but we have a fantastic team that do that. The UAE is a little bit different than many places in the world. The GCAA, the government entity, assigns one person to be the accountable manager. And that person is responsible for the safety of every flight and the financial wherewithal of the airline. So you have to make sure you satisfy those. And if the GCAA has any complaints, then they come to you to lodge their complaints. Now, all airlines have things that happen on a regular basis. We'll have fortunately, I joined after our 981 accident as the COO, but I was very much involved with the GCA on the after action and looking at remedies for that. From a COO perspective, I do get to make some decisions. One of the decisions that I thought was very important, having flown the Airbus and flown the Boeing, there's two different philosophies from the two airplanes. Boeing likes to say we're a manly airplane, a pilot airline, and pilots just fly the airplane, and you don't have computer interfaces, which we know they somewhat spoke with a little mischievousness when the MAX came along. But the Airbus, really wants to highlight, hey, let's use all this technology to our advantage. Let's see how we can make the airplane as easy as possible to fly. So having flown both airplanes, I hugely love technology. And when Fly Dubai started, Ken brought the Southwest ideas, which were great ideas, and the use of the HUD. The HUD's an amazing piece of equipment, and I love the HUD. And I would never take away the HUD. But having flown the Airbus and having flown the Boeing with Cat 3 capability and Autoland, I said, for Fly Dubai, I think, and it's my preference, and as COO, I want us to have Autoland, because we're flying 24/7. We're flying to some really, really difficult places. We're flying on the backside of the clock. The way the scheduling system was, we had many times where you had the most junior captain flying with the most junior first officer to the most difficult airport at 4 a.m. in the morning. And although I like to think I'm a great pilot, as an instructor, if I was to look at the last 100 landings from all the pilots that were going through, if they were hand-flown landings, I'd have I could see a chart and I could see a gap. But if I looked at the last 100 auto lands, laser-like precision, just laser-like. And so I never want anybody to use Autoland as a crutch, but I always want them to have that capability. And when you're tired, when the weather is bad, very much want to make it so that you can just use the technology on the airplane. And the same was true for Kathmandu. I found out that we were not doing RNPARs, where other peoples were doing RNPARs. And it was two things. It was we weren't giving the pilots everything they needed, but from a commercial perspective, we were not landing when other airlines were landing. I think the Viz without the RNPAR requirement was 2.8, and with RNPAR, it's 1.1. So I said, hey, we have to implement RNPAR. Now, realistically, it's a stack of paperwork, of thousands of pages that needs to be done to get that. But we were able to get that done. And again, if you're an instructor and you watch somebody fly a manual approach to Kathmandu, you see them squeezing the juice out of the flight controls. You see the pit rings under their shirt. You really see the head barely move. It becomes almost singularly focused. And that's what we do under stress. And then you tell them to do an RNPAR, and after a while you go, hey, they're looking around. Hey, look down here. Look at so-and-so's house. They're drinking their coffee. They're having a Coke. It's just so comfortable, and it's so much safer because you have such a bigger grasp of the big picture. So yes, as COO, I get to make a few decisions, and we were able to negotiate with Boeing to get the Cat 3 capability at a phenomenal price. So I always say there's challenges. I wish I could change everything in the world, but there's always a financial issue to it. And sometimes you have to make compromises, but this is one where Boeing worked very, very closely with us to give it to a price that made it so that
those
it was a no-brainer for us.
That actually did a big difference with Autoland, when the RP were really they made a difference for the daily basis operations, as you said, and it increased a lot the safety of the company. Chris, I'd like to ask you about so Felix asked you about disruptions a little bit earlier. So I'd like to ask you about two massive disruptions that Flydubai faced and you faced as a COO. The first was the grounding of the MAX, right?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more from your perspective how you as manager deal with this all this drama from the MAX and all the outcomes that possible, all the things that didn't work, because I think everybody expected that they would be grounded for like a couple months only, and then end up that it was more than 2 years. So can you just give us an idea?
Yeah, I mean, certainly hugely challenging from an operational perspective, challenging from a financial perspective. To have all your brand new MAX airplanes grounded at a single point in time. Before the MAX was grounded, we were getting information from Boeing, and so they were keeping us informed, but they were keeping us informed kind of like everybody else. There's a lot of disappointments on how the MAX, because of the MAX accidents, and when you find out that the pilots weren't aware necessarily of a system that's in the airplane that could cause them, to perish, and you just think, how could that possibly happen? Well, and then, I think we could probably talk about this for hours. But after the MAX grounding, we were invited to Seattle, so we went very quickly. Our SVP of flight ops, myself, and one of our head instructors, we went out there and we got to learn what had happened. We got to fly the airplane in the sim, and we got to hear some of the things that Boeing was doing. And we quickly, from Flydubai perspective, brought up a couple things that we talked a little bit about arrogance. I think, the OEMs, whether Airbus or Boeing, sometimes they have to look past the things that they're being told or the things that they think and look and get a broader perspective of input from others. And basically, at the time, as you mentioned, Boeing was saying, hey, it'll be a month, it'll be 2 months, it'll be a couple months, and we'll have everything back up to speed. So we get out there, and that's what we're hearing. And one of the first things that they say is, we're going to do CBT after we tell you what we're doing to fix the airplanes, and that's all you're going to need is CBT. And we say absolutely not. It's just not going to work. You can't ground an airplane, and the public perception can't be that you haven't given your pilot simulator training on this. This is, and they just push back. So that was one issue. Another issue was that we brought up that your manuals are pretty much directed towards an English-speaking audience, a U.S. audience. There's lots of words in here and lots of things here that don't necessarily work on the other side of the earth. And you've got everything set up here, and we really think you need to rethink about how you're writing some of these manuals. Again, I don't think they paid much attention to that. Then when they're going through their sim studies, they're doing their sim studies, and they're asking the chief pilots and the head instructors from all the airlines to come and run through the scenarios and then run through the fixes and see how well they respond. And we're saying, no. That's okay to get that perspective, and that's part of it. But we need the 200-hour pilot to be in there, and I want to see how the 200-hour pilot responds. And if the 200-hour pilot responds satisfactorily, then it's okay for everybody else. And then we realized that some of these chief pilots weren't doing a great job either. So, you have to, if you want to, after all this and after this grounding, you have to make sure that this airplane and the pilots, every single one is 100% trained in case something happens. And during this process, we learned how the system was made. There wasn't the proper redundancy. There wasn't the proper backups. All the things that you think in aviation you always have. I mean, when I'm talking to the team, we're usually saying, okay, what's our primary thing? What's our backup mode? What's our tertiary mode? You're always looking at backups upon backups, and you think that's the way airplanes are designed. The system wasn't designed that way. And again, that's somewhat of another story. But the last thing that was challenging, but we've worked very closely with the Boeing team, and we love the Boeing team, and we're very much in lockstep in so many things now because there's a fantastic relationship with Fly Dubai and the Boeing team because they realize that we have the credibility to talk about a lot of these subjects and come up with good ideas, not just for Fly Dubai, but for all the other airlines that are out there. But the last thing that really boggled my mind, and I kind of went to bat with them, they said, okay, we're going to fix it. You're going to have the airplane fixed. We're going to do all these things, and then go ahead and fly the airplane with passengers. You don't need to do any type of functional flight. And we said, oh, absolutely not. We're not putting passengers on the airplane after they've been sitting for a year and a half, 2 years. For the first flight ever of this airplane after it's been sitting, we need to have a profile, and we need to send all the airplanes on a profile before we put them back into service. So they took that for granted. I mean, they took that and they said, okay, we've come up with a profile, and they showed us the profile. And we're looking at the profile, and one of the first things we said is, well, you're not starting the APU on the profile. Well, what do I need to start the APU for? Well, you have these airplanes that have been sitting there for 2 years. I have a little concern about these brand new engines. And if the engine quits, the first thing I want to do is start the APU. So I want to make sure the APU is working. They had said, oh, you don't need to start the APU unless you're doing an ETOPS flight. And that's kind of how the scenario was. So we said, hey, we'll come up with a profile. So Rod and Patrick and the team came up with a profile. And surprisingly, the profile that Boeing ended up was almost a mirror image of the profile that we had shared.
And problem sorted. My question to you is, how good is the MAX for the company?
Well, I think the MAX is probably the safest, if not the safest airplane in the world, because it has gotten so much scrutiny. And the systems have been looked, and they've been looked over and over and over again. The one thing is, because it has a brand new engine, anytime you have a brand new engine, it's going to take somewhere between 2 and 5 years before that engine matures. And we're seeing things, and and that we're changing the engines. We're doing more maintenance on the engines than we do on the NG. But at a certain point in time, the engine will mature and it's going to be fantastic. And, sustainability is one of the big buzzwords in the industry. We all want a green earth. We all want to be sustainable. We're getting fantastic fuel savings from the engine. And I think, I'm proud to say that I think Fly Dubai has the nicest 737s in the world. I don't know anybody who has 16 lay flatbeds on their 737. And it's such an amazing airplane to fly in. And it really makes you proud to say, hey, this is the nicest 737 in the world, besides somebody's own personal private jet.
Chris, I'd like to get a hook on that. And since you dealt with a very big problem, which was the grounding of the MAX, right after that, the world faced the pandemic. And how was for you being the leader of such a nice and big company as Fly Dubai to handle with a situation where you didn't have enough information to make the decision? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and a couple different aspects. As we first started hearing about COVID, we had from previous issues, we had what we had put together because we fly to Africa. We had a very small Ebola task force. And because we had been looking at Ebola, we have such a diverse network that we deal with so many different problems on a seasonal basis. So when we first started hearing with COVID, we just dusted off the Ebola task force and started putting them to start getting information. And then when we realized that what was happening with COVID, our little group of 3 or 4 became a team of about 30 people to look at every aspect of this, to get all the information. Because we went from about 250 flights a day down to 0. The airline was just shut down. Now, I will say we were better positioned than most airlines because we had been through the MAX grounding. So we had dealt with a lot of these issues. So we had been well prepared. Not that there weren't 100 new challenges that we were unprepared for, but we already had a team in place, and now we just grew this team to be a very big team. And in fact, we still meet once a week. And today we finally decided that we don't need our COVID task force to meet together anymore. If something comes up, the team is still there, but we'll just do it administratively. But we've met we were meeting almost daily, then we went to twice a week, then weekly. And we talk about all the different aspects of COVID. And one of the first things we did was we said, hey, let's start doing cargo in the cabin. Let's figure out how to keep some grease on the wheels of the airplanes, on the operation. Now, if I have been dealing with the FAA back home in the US, we would have never gotten cargo in the cabin approved. It just would never have happened. But we are fortunate that we have a fantastic relationship with the GCAA. And I'm not saying they minimize safety at all, because we did much, much more than I would have anticipated. When I first wanted to do cargo in the cabin, I said, okay, we'll just start doing cargo in the cabin. We'll just lash it to the seats. No. They want us to have cabin crew on board because they want us to watch it. They want us to have extra extinguishers on board. And so we really went overboard on the extra steps just to make sure we kept it a safe operation. And then finally, at a certain point, not only the GCA, but EASA said, okay, you guys have to stop doing cargo in the cabin unless you're really going to do it through engineering studies. And those engineering studies usually take 6 months to a year. So that was one of the first things we started to do. But again, just like the MAX grounding, you don't know if this is a 1-month event, a 2-month event, a 6-month event. And as this continued to grow and we saw everything shutting down, we had some tremendous challenges to do because, we have a fairly significant staff and we're bringing in just a pittance of revenue. Now, fortunately, I can say Gaith Al-Gaith, our CEO, is the most compassionate and caring CEO I've ever worked for. And as we're talking about all the decisions, he just said, hey, I know somebody next door has just terminated 30,000 employees. We are not going to do that. we have to make some difficult decisions. We will have to put some people on unpaid leave. We're all going to have to take some pay cuts. But I don't want anybody to lose hope that they're being terminated. Even if they're on unpaid leave, as soon as things start, we'll bring them all back. And we'll make sure. And realistically, about 98% of the people all came back. And unfortunately, the marketplace was such they couldn't get other jobs, or they couldn't get jobs that were any type of jobs that they wanted to sustain. So one of the amazing things that happened, and we were very much blessed by it, we made a decision, and that you have to also look at the UAE. I don't think any country in the world did a better job of fighting COVID than the UAE, and putting things in place, and vaccinations and safety, and then trying to restart the economy. So we saw this, and it was, I'm trying to think, 2021, we didn't make any money the first half of the year. We still lost money. But then we saw that things were going to recover, and we were able to quickly bring back people. And so that the fourth quarter of 2021 was actually the most profitable quarter in the history of the airline. Now, again, we were blessed because we were so ahead of the curve. People who hadn't traveled for two years really wanted to travel, and there wasn't a whole lot of capacity. So we had the capacity. Now, we are certainly charging a premium for that capacity, but we were able to have the best quarter in the history of the airline. And although we didn't make money in the first half of the year, our yearly results were over 3 times greater than any yearly results in the history of the airline. And I think probably we were the most profitable airline that year than any airline in the world, because of all of these things came into place. And the first quarter of this year was better than the fourth quarter of last year. And then this huge spike in fuel has now hurt and has kind of wiped a lot of that out. So that's our latest struggle, is how do you deal with this massive cost of fuel?
It's really nice that you touched bases regarding the staff, regarding the people, because that would be my follow-up question, because in the aviation community, Fly Dubai became famous by how it treated its own people. And at least among pilots, it became really well known, the humane way that people were treated. It's really nice to hear that from you. Thank you.
Well, and the other thing was, because we nobody wants to take money away from somebody, but everybody sacrificed. And then when we got the profits, then the company turned around with profit sharing and gave a lot of that money back to the staff.
That's amazing. Chris, we're almost at the end of our podcast already. We've been talking more than an hour. And usually at the end of the podcast, we always ask our guests to leave a message to the youngs or the new pilots. But today we talked so many about leadership that instead of, let's put this message in a different way on as what you can say about leadership, on how to be a good leader, or some positive message for the next guys that want to be a leadership as good as you are.
Well, thank you for saying that. I'm sure that's a debatable question, because I certainly have my detractors on P-Prune and other places. A couple of things. One of the things I learned at a very young age, I was 17 when I went into the military. And as you look at leaders, you find those that really impress you, and you find those that you really hate. And I've always tried and say, look at the attributes of those that you love and try and be like them, and look at the ones that you hate and try never to do those things. So part of that is a learning experience. Another part of that, as a leader, you should not ask anybody to do anything you're unwilling to do yourself, or something you haven't done in the past. And one of the things that's nice to have as a leader, if you can do it, is if you have credibility. If you have credibility, then people are more willing to trust you because you do have credibility. Again, I hate to talk about myself. I've talked more about myself in this last hour than I think I've ever have in my whole life. And again, as part of I'm retiring, and my wife goes, "You're starting to sound like my father, who he tells these stories over and over and over again. You've never told these stories. None of us know these stories about you, and now all these stories are coming out." But you certainly want to have credibility. But when I wrote my final letter to the Fly Dubai ops team, and I said 4 things. And I said, 1, we're running an airline, and the foundation of everything we have to do has to be safety. You just have to be safe, and you have to do everything you can for safety. Number 2, and this holds for a leader, I want you to be optimistic. I can remember being in the network control during some very difficult times and trying to convey optimism to everybody. If the leader starts looking like he's going to burn in the fire, that's not a good thing. But if the leader says, "Hey, we're going to get through this. We got a great team. We're going to handle this. There's nothing that we can't do." You have to be optimistic. The third thing was to be proactive. I get told a lot of times something that's wrong in the airline, and I want to hear all the things that are wrong in the airline. But what I really appreciate is somebody who tells me something's wrong and they've thought ahead and they have a solution to the problem. Anybody can pick things apart and tell you what's wrong, but I like people to think ahead and say, "Hey, okay, this is wrong, and here's some solutions. Here's 1 solution, here's 2 solutions, here's 3 solutions. Let's be proactive." And number 4, I said, and this comes more from a spiritual perspective, but I want you to be joyful always. You are at work more than you're at home. And it's my job to make your work a joyful experience. It's my job to make it so that you enjoy coming to work. You want to come back to work. You want to stay. One of the things that I do that I don't think any airline has ever done before, of all the airlines I've been in, but I like to talk to all the new hire pilots. And I like to get them into class. I like to tell them the business plan. I like to tell them the history. They need to know the business plan because you're all business people. You're all captains, you're future captains, and we're going to give you a very expensive asset, and I want you to bring it back safely, but I want you to understand the economics of that and how expensive it is to run. But I also want you to have confidence that we have a great team running the airline, and I say, I will be disappointed if you ever leave before your retirement date. I want you to stay here and retire here. And shame on me if I can't make it so that it's a fun place for you to work. And that's where it should be joyful always. And one thing that I, some people say, what did you do different as a captain than other captains? And I had to think, what did I do different? One of the things, and maybe many of you do this, but whenever I was giving the flight attendant brief, you'd give them the weather, you'd give them all the things that are going on, but I would always close the brief with the flight attendants, and I would always say, "Please let me know anything I can do to help you to make your job easier. My job is to make your job easier. And how can I do that?" So we're a team, but the airline success is dependent on all of us. And my job, and the looks I used to get from flight attendants, you want to help me? You're a captain and you want to help me? Yes, my job is to help you. My job is to make your job easier.
Chris, for us, like me and Guilherme and most of our colleagues on our age and experience level at this point in time, it is very, very important that we actually get to have a chat with someone as in an important position like yourself, to give us this insight, and so that we understand exactly what you just said, that you are there running the whole operation and your main goal is to make everything work smoothly, and so that we as future captains, when we are now transitioning to that management position as well, we think about that on optic, on a different perspective. So I have to thank you. I'm grateful to be here and to listen to your insights and those bullet points, which are very, very valuable. But then I have a question which talks about maybe number one, resilience, that everyone loves this word, and I wanted to hear from you. And then how do you prepare or react to unexpected situations?
Expected or unexpected?
Unexpected. How do you expect the unexpected?
Well, and again, it's nothing that's different from flying. You want to be prepared. You want to be well trained. You can't. There's always going to be a scenario that you didn't anticipate and something new. Who would have ever thought the worldwide COVID pandemic? Exactly. Who would have ever thought the brand new 737 MAX would be shut down for 2 years? But part of the preparation is having a great team and putting together a team that's very, very competent, that are good thinkers, that have those attributes that I talked about, that are optimistic, that are proactive, that are always looking for solutions. But also running the drills. We run those drills, and we run those drills on a regular basis. Those drills are to prepare you for the unexpected. Just getting the team together and sitting all at that table and see, how do you run it? How do you do the agenda? There's 10 things going on at once, and you need to take this total craziness that's going on and manage it in a very confident and comfortable way. And so again, you practice, you drill. And that's kind of the things that I learned from my Navy and military background. Because I look at the airlines in the US have very few issues on an operational basis to compare to what we have. Some of the other things that we've had happen at Fly Dubai. You're flying into Baghdad and somebody shooting at your airplane. Where the Iranians shoot a U.S. drone down, and now a significant portion of the airspace is closed that we need. Our last flight to Yemen, the captain calls up and says, "Hey, some guy's driving around in a pickup truck with an RPG in the back," and later on he said, "I was afraid my mom was going to see me in an orange suit, and that was the last time she was going to see me." And then you have the issues with India and Pakistan occasionally have these skirmishes that are going on. We had an issue where we had a crew stuck where there's an uprising, a political uprising. But because we have such a good team, we're able to come with solutions, and we never look at just one way of doing things. Look at multiple ways of fixing whatever the problems are.
And Chris, talking about resilience, right? I'd like to hear a little bit more from you from a personal perspective, because I know you've been through some deep waters during your life, your career. I've heard that you ejected yourself from an airplane and the parachute didn't work once. You've been through 3 bankruptcies. You fought cancer. What else? You had several back surgeries and this kind of stuff. I guess you can talk about self-resilience, right? And give a message to our audience, especially for those new pilots who are still deciding if they should, go through it and take the risk, and because it's very expensive to afford a pilot training, right? And for those who are still somehow hit by pandemic, and I would like to hear a message from you, from a person that has been through a lot of stuff, motivation to these people, how you survive, how you go through these deep waters.
You got hit a lot of the nail on the head. I would say my first parachute jump, again, I volunteered to parachute, and maybe it's not a good idea to volunteer, but the first time I volunteered, my chute didn't open. Fortunately, I had a reserve chute. My third jump, I came down spinning like a top and broke my leg, and then I decided it wasn't worth parachuting anymore. But I never have ejected from an airplane, although I've had some very close encounters. there's multiple ways to look at it. You're right. I had stage 4 cancer. Most people die from stage 4 cancer. I've had 5 hernia operations. I've had 2 major back surgeries, been through two bankruptcies at U.S. Airways, another bankruptcy at Fly Dubai, getting told at another airline that you don't fit in, going to another airline, realizing they don't have enough money to continue to pay everybody. So, but I some people won't want to hear this, but I look at it from a very spiritual perspective. I always say that I'm number 4. God is first, my family is second, my friends and my job are third, and I am fourth. And that's my priority list. Not that sometimes it doesn't shift, but as long as you keep a positive attitude, and I said as I was going through stage 4 cancer, where I lost 50 pounds, over 25 kilos of weight. I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink. Like I said, most people die. But I said, hey, I'm ready to die because if that's what's meant to be. But if you want me to stick around here, God, which I hope you do, I will try and do the best I possibly can for you in every single avenue that we have. And I mentioned before we started that I hope as I retire to provide some guidance to NGOs and nonprofit organizations to help others, to help the needy in other areas. But I think you have to maintain your optimism. And whenever a door closes, another door is going to open. It may not be as soon as you want it to open, but it will open as long as you maintain your optimism. And it's not wrong about getting depressed during difficult times. It's not wrong to despair, but you have to get past that at a certain point, because if you can't get past that, it's going to be a long time before that door opens. But if you can get past that and stay optimistic, something good is going to happen and something good will come along.
Chris, absolutely. We are, Guilherme is clapping, and we will add the claps here because we have our microphones in mute. But, well, we couldn't actually, of course we couldn't, but you can, and you just did it. You just choose the best of the best words to enlighten the path for us with this answer. So, well, congratulations.
Hey, thank you guys. It's been my pleasure.
Well, I'd like to also thank you very much, Chris, for being with us. I read the other day a saying. Someone posted something like, I will read it. When I talk to managers, I get the feeling that they are important. When I talk to leaders, I get the feeling I'm important. So I think that resumes a lot of what we've heard so far. It's been a pleasure to have you with us. It's been amazing to talk to someone who has so much experience, so much good stuff to share with people. Because at the end of the day, life is about sharing, right? Life's about caring and sharing. And you as the leader, you take care of people. And when you said that you never talk so much about you, actually, you were doing the opposite. You're not talking about yourself. You were actually doing something that we don't realize that how much people we can reach through a podcast like this, and how much of a change we can make in people's life by sharing our good side. Of course, everybody has its bad sides, its demons, but by sharing your own experiences, you're not being selfish and talking about yourself. You're actually inspiring people like us, like we are, like our audience who are here with us. And I'm sure that this episode is going to be epic, and it's a real pleasure for us to have you here. I hope you have a great retirement, but I have the feeling that you're not going to retire entirely. You're going to take a break and you're going to start doing something else very soon. But I think the whole community of aviation should be grateful for your service along these years and for sharing so many blessings. As you end up your communication emails always with many blessings, right?
Yes.
greetings. Your greetings, many blessings. I think we are blessed to have you here. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. And I would just close by saying the pilot job is the best job in the world. It by far is the best job. And you have the greatest office in the whole world. And looking back, people say, hey, would you do it the same? And I said, I would probably do it the same until I became the TRE, or the training instructor. In the US, we call it all seats, all checks. That's just the finest job in the world. Once you go into management, it's a completely different story, because then you have so many more challenges. Not that they aren't rewarding, but if I had to do it all again just for personal enjoyment, I would say, hey, I just love flying. I love teaching. I love sitting in the right seat, the left seat, doing simulators, doing test flights, doing delivery flights. What a joy that is. And it's not that you don't, but my family suffers a little more when I go into management, because it is so time consuming and it's a 24/7, 365. But it has been totally rewarding.
Well, Chris, we just gonna finish again with a big thank you, and we are grateful indeed to have you here. Once again, thank you very much, and once again, thanks to our sponsors, Hangar 33 e Realizar, Escola de Aviação Civil. Thank you all. Obrigado a vocês que chegaram até aqui, and it is a very, very great episode. And see you next time. Adios.